Good morning and welcome to the special meeting of the Little Canada City Council, or the Little Canada City. We're here to discuss Twin Lake. We have everyone here except Councilman Fisher could not be able to attend. And as we start here, there will be no public comment period. This is a special meeting just to make a decision where we're going to go. So with that, I will turn it over to our city administrator to give some background.
Thank you, Mayor Keese and council members. As you mentioned, Councilmember Fisher is not able to attend, but he did provide a letter. I provided that around the dais, and I'll actually read that into the presentation after Bill Dirks provides some more background here. But just as a context for this meeting, we have had two public meetings from the city perspective related to the Twin Lake issue. We've been partnering with the Ramsey-Washington Watershed, and they conducted those meetings with the assistance of Bar Engineering. And then just last night, the board meeting at the Ramsey-Washington Watershed was very well attended and had additional information that was provided in detail, which several of you were at as well. So we have had a significant public process for over 6 months with this unprecedented high water mark issue. And I think Bill can go through some of the details and summary of that process before getting into some of our options available. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, most of this was reported last night at the presentation, but as you're aware, the level reached 876.1 yesterday with the overflow at 877. So we are now officially higher than the low home on the lake, 154 Twin Lake Boulevard. So at the meeting last night, the Board of Commissioners for the Watershed voted to support a pumping operation. They went through the calculations and they have deemed that if we pump during dry weather and then shut the pumps off in anticipation of rain events, we should be able to protect. I mean, there is some risk there, but we should be able to protect the Owasso Basin, the North Star Estates area, and then there's less risk at Jarvis, but still some risk. It's not zero, but there is a good chance that we can protect all of those properties. The primary goal for pumping would be to get to below the low house on Twin Lake, and we've worked with the contractor. We're ready to get a pump set up, a 12-inch pump out in the field to the south of the railroad tracks. We would need a road to be built to that to get access to where the pump will go, and for the fuel truck to be able to get in and out of there. It could get a little muddy without a road built, and so Frank Fratellone has offered to construct that road for us. Gave us a price for that of $6,400, and the current estimate on the pumping is kind of a $25,000 for the first month and for setup. So that's going to be the highest cost right out of the gates, and then the monthly costs after that are basically just for their employees to maintain the pumps, fuel costs, those types of things. If anything were to go wrong, they would have to come out and do some work on it, but the costs come way down after that initial setup cost. They're talking about an 18-inch HDPE discharge pipe run for 800 feet or whatever that measurement is out to the Waldo Pond. So there's a lot of work to go into getting it set up. They are working on getting a pump corralled here as soon as they can. He didn't want to commit to late this week. It may be possible. We have to get the road built first, but we would ideally be set up and ready to go early next week, with the idea being to get ahead of the water coming in from West Vadnais, and then also a little bit more so that we can start the process of getting the lake to come down. But most importantly, we get that lake stabilized and get it down below the low home. We would shut that pump off when there's a rain event forecast, 12 to 24 hours before that event, and then turn it back on once things were safe again and the rainstorm had moved through the system. I think that covers everything.
Mr. Mayor, and Bill, if you could actually add just a little bit of additional information, what you know about the MnDOT action plan.
Oh, right, I'm sorry, yeah. So we did, we have applied for a permit with MnDOT. MnDOT has agreed to kind of fast track that. The permit was submitted last night, and they should be approving that within a day or two. We also were required to get a permit from the DNR, an appropriations permit. They have already approved that permit. So we're good to go with the DNR, and MnDOT, they're going to be out at the pond today putting some reinforcement, as you heard last night, to reinforce in case that pond ever does overtop at 877. They don't want that to erode away, so they're going to be putting some reinforcement out there today, but they are in support of the pumping operation.
Very good. So if I could bring it back to some of our options available. As was, excuse me, as was discussed at the Watershed meeting last night, there are several options, but we're primarily considering one of the more feasible options, with at least trying to take the edge off with the pumping. But we do want to focus on the fact that we're trying to enhance the protection of the structures around the lake, and particularly the low opening structures. As you may recall from all the previous information, the lowest opening is the one that was sandbagged first 2 weeks ago, and that's at an elevation of 876. And as Bill mentioned, the current water elevation as of yesterday is 876.1. So we are technically over that low opening, and the sandbags are technically protecting that property. That's the only reason we don't have water intrusion. The next low opening is an 878, and that property is also protected. So there is the feasibility that the city could do nothing more, that we could basically rely on the 877 pipe opening in the MnDOT berm, and ride it out. Hope that we see not a higher water event year, rainfall year than typical years, and hope that evaporation and ground recharge takes its role. But given the history, given the recent, even the start to the spring, we're already in the high percentage of rainfall events this year. So that is not recommended from staff. We're looking at a pretty significant chance that we would be challenging that both the low water entry or low water opening plus the 877 overflow. And so pumping Twin Lake is the option that Bill has gone through. I do have a letter from Councilmember Fisher that I'd like to read into this, just as background information, and then we can talk a little bit about potential costs and address any questions that you may have. So letter drafted yesterday after the Watershed meeting, Twin Lake water level issue. My apologies for not being able to attend in person, but I have a conflict. I'm hosting a business meeting with international attendees. Thank you to the Watershed for their unanimous support of a pumping effort to reduce the water levels on Twin Lake. I also believe it is important for the City Council to act to preserve the homes surrounding Twin Lake from the rising water levels and assist in efforts to reduce the water levels. As it relates to reducing water levels, I support pumping water from Twin Lake with a few conditions. One, the city understands the downstream risks associated with this pumping. Two, there's a risk management plan that A, illustrates how the pumping will be managed, B, what monitoring will be established to protect downstream properties, and C, what actions are available to prevent downstream properties from damage as a result of this pumping effort. And then 3, the not to exceed costs the city will incur to set up a pumping station, and the estimated ongoing costs to manage the pumping activity are acceptable to my peers on the council. I know from an array of conversations over the past few days that my conditional considerations are well understood and actively being planned. Tom Fisher. So just to address those items, the downstream risks I think were addressed very well by the Ramsey-Washington Watershed. I think the most prominent risk is the immediate area after the MnDOT area before it gets to the Owasso Basin. As you saw some of the specific pictures that were provided, or some of you saw that, the North Star Mobile Home Park is probably our most immediate risk downstream, and we need to monitor that very closely. The additional risk is a very low percentage based on the runs and the calculations that Bar Engineering has provided. The risk management plan that Tom asked about, how the pumping will be managed, that'll be a work in progress, I think, but we certainly have both city staff and we have engineering staff through Bolton and Mink, and then Bar Engineering, I think, continuing to do modeling that would be helping with that monitoring process. And actions that are available to prevent downstream, I think that was included as well in the recommendation from the Watershed, that we, in any forecast rain event, that we shut off the pumps 12 to 24 hours ahead of time. Any forecast rain event, was it over a certain amount, or was it just over 2-inch rain event? Is that what?
2 inches, what they had said.
Okay. So that'll be a part of the monitoring process, and I think we need to, if there's any action that we take here, we should acknowledge that that is a key point in providing risk management, is monitoring that on a daily basis, even on weekends. And the last item there, the not to exceed costs, that one is a very difficult situation because it's an unknown. We don't know how the pumping will impact the actual lake levels. If we didn't have the inflow from the Vadnais side, it would be much easier to calculate. But we have a certain amount of pumping that we'll have to do to even make a difference and start to lower the lake levels. We do know, obviously, the setup cost being that $25,000 range plus the $6,000 road that must be built, so we're already in excess of $30,000. We also are assuming that this is not something that will be resolved in 2 to 3 weeks in that one month period. We likely will need to be pumping for months to make a difference here. And so we don't have the cost of those ongoing months, but we know it's both a rental cost, a fuel cost, and a monitoring cost. I think we can pretty safely assume that it's going to be in excess of $5,000 per month. It might be double that or more. So big picture, I think we're talking potentially that any decision made here today to pump is probably in the range of a $50,000 decision or more.
Or more.
And that, just to put that in frame of reference, we're getting into 2 to 3% of our general fund levy. So that's not an insignificant decision for a city the size of Little Canada. That could mean that we will have requested levy increases coming forward next year if this is something that we were to continue. For right now, though, just to go through some of the funding options that we have available, I've been working with Brenda over the last few days here, and we do have some options. I guess maybe first and foremost, I'll mention that we have fund balance policy states that unreserved fund balance is provided for unforeseen expenditures related to emergencies, such as this. And the 2018 unreserved fund balance was actually 50% of our 2019 expenditure budget, or $1.9 million is in our fund balance. Again, that fund balance is to cover us because we only get our tax levies on two times per year, so it's to cover those expenditures for 5 months until we get our levy payments. But that fund balance is not sitting there
Doing nothing.
doing nothing. But that is our end of year fund balance for 2018, the unreserved fund balance. Other sources of funding for this, we do have some salary savings based on our budgeted salary expenditures. We held due to the finance director hiring process and the vacancy, we had a couple months of salary savings there, which equals about $6,500 right now. So that is one sum. We have already exceeded our annual budgeted amount for revenue in building permits. I think we've mentioned that in a previous meeting, mostly due to our Bix Produce $16 million renovation project. So anything that we receive on building permits from now through the end of the year is in excess of our revenue. And that projection is actually potentially over $100,000, depending on, of course, what permits come in. And then we also, as you may remember, in 2018, we issued conduit bonds for Presbyterian homes on a housing project. That's not anything that we financially have a cost or an obligation to, but we benefit from a 0.5% sales ratio on that. So in 2018, we received $28,000 from the issuance of conduit bonds, and that was a two-part issuance, or at least as proposed. So we are anticipating that we will have at least a $28,000 bond proceeds for the issuances of that conduit bond debt. So as of right now, budgeting-wise, we do have probably in the range of $100,000 to $150,000 revenue or revenue over expenditures anticipated. But of course, those are based on a lot of variables and things change. So, but long story, or big picture, we do have resources available either through our unreserved fund balance or anticipated revenue over expenditures to address this issue.
So that money though that's an every year type of occurrence. I mean,
For for which one?
well, for just the money we have available that's not, quote, committed or sitting there. I mean, if we start dipping into that at the end of the year, that potentially could result in increases in levies. And
Absolutely.
that we try to keep down, so.
Correct. So that is the background information that I have. I guess at this time, we also have Tina from the Ramsey-Washington Watershed in the room, and we have Mark Kasma from Bolton & Mank. If there's any questions that you have, technical or otherwise, either staff or either of those representatives can address some of those questions.
Can I'll just start on, excuse me. What steps are we going to take, or what steps have we taken to research outside resources for funding?
So I have reached out only to one resource. We've had, as I've mentioned before, close partnerships with a lot of different agencies, including our local representatives and senators. And so I've passed that request along to Representative.
Okay.
But we also have one possibility that was recommended. Let me maybe just recap this. It's probably unlikely, but certainly something worth researching. If there was any sort of FEMA disaster assistance. But the process for that is you need to have a declaration, an emergency declaration, and that comes through the governor's office, and it's based on overall impact to the county typically. So that would be something to check on, and definitely been through that process. But in some ways, I would hope that doesn't happen, because that means that we would have widespread damage throughout the county more than just this issue. And so alternative to that, checking with the DNR specifically for some of those potential one-time funding sources is something that we can do, or we can rely on our partners at Bolton & Mank to assist us with. But otherwise, there's really not a lot of funding sources that I'm aware of outside of emergency funding through FEMA.
Or what about the county? Doesn't the county have any emergency funding?
Again, we can check, but I'm not aware of any sort of a fund that's set aside for those types of issues.
City of Shoreview or Vadnais Heights?
As far as other sources, I mean, maybe as an example, the city of Shoreview, and you heard some of the comments last night, has taken a different action on a similar issue on one of the other lakes in the watershed. So they're not at this point taking any further action, even though there's desired action by residents. So this is a fairly unique position for a city to be in, to be taking this level action, and it's I think caused by the fact that we're at unprecedented high water levels, but we also have an outlet pipe that is at a higher level than our lowest entry point, which and then the fact that it's obviously a landlocked basin. So a number of unique issues that make this worth consideration for the city council.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I just want to comment that what we're here for today is basically the emergency situation. But there is, obviously, there's a very big picture that we have to look at. I mean, us taking water from Vadnais and dumping it into our city, that whole situation has to be reviewed. But to focus back on the emergency pumping, at the meeting last night, I was taking notes, there was, you start adding up the partners, you have the residents, the city, MnDOT, you've got DNR, you start adding them up, you got almost a dozen different parties involved, and so it all gets kind of convoluted and everybody starts to go, like this. So what we're trying to do here today is, which I think is going to be great, is we're going to be able to start to pump that water out of Twin Lake and get some sort of semblance of what's, of at least get the homes protected. Now I have a question for Bill, if I can.
Yeah.
So the pump, first of all, the road's going to be on will be on Frank Fratello's property,
Correct,
and the pump will be on Frank's property.
correct.
Okay, and he's fine with that.
He is supportive of it, yes.
Okay, so does that then have to cross the railroad tracks? Isn't the
No, so the way the
The
lake
berm-
is
where the
overflowing
berm is.
underneath, there's essentially a twin lake on
Right,
the
I
south
guess-
side of the tracks, and as you draw that down, the whole lake draws down with it, because it's equalized with that pipe that runs under the tracks.
Got it.
So as you draw that down on the south side, the whole lake comes down
Okay,
with it.
and that's on Frank's property.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
I don't presume this is going to be an issue, but perhaps we should act to protect ourselves. Can we make sure that his allowance to put the pump and the road on his property is written in written agreement format, and that it's insulated from any future business we might have with Frank or his companies in the future?
Yeah, I think we could pursue that with Frank.
Okay, thank you.
I have another,
Yeah.
I have another question, Mr. Mayor. Bill, does MnDOT restricting the amount of water you can put in that pond?
Only during rain events, if I understand correctly, yeah. So just if they want us to stop the pumps, if there's that 2-inch rainfall
Yeah.
expected. Otherwise, they can handle the pumped water coming through.
Okay.
Any amount? I mean, there's a 15-inch pipe underneath the freeway that dumps over into,
That's a separate system. This is a big pipe. This is a 70-inch pipe, I think,
out of the,
out of Waldo Pond.
Really?
to,
That's the one that goes through the MnDOT system and over to Owasso
Okay.
there.
so we don't have any issues of overflowing that pond?
No, there should be no issues except for a rain
Right.
event.
Okay.
I'll ask this question. Are we taking any steps to send notifications to some of the affected property owners like North Star Estates and
we'll be.
Jarvis Lake Homeowners Association?
We'll be contacting both parties.
Okay, thank you.
What about the industrial park? Does that have any worry of flooding if North Star Estates has the worry of flooding?
I think only in a really big event that would be an issue, and that would be whether we're pumping or not. So I don't think that they're threatened by this pumping as much as the North Star Estates are, or at all.
Can the pumping go on during the winter?
Maybe just till freeze up? So until the lake freezes, we can keep pumping, and if we,
So what happens then during freeze up? Does that stop the whole system? Does that stop the water up at Grass Lake from flowing? Or are we going to be forced with rising water during the winter when we're forced to stop pumping at Twin Lake?
I would have to defer to the Watershed or bar on that. Not sure if that water will
Go ahead, T.
freeze up.
Please.
Hello, Tina Carson's Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District. That really depends on the climatic conditions. Sometimes we have seen freeze up where it has stopped flowing, but then I think last year it did flow all year long. So, and it depends on the levels we're at that point in time. And it's possible, I don't know what the conditions, I'd have to ask our engineers how that would work, but if there's an opportunity to still pull from Twin, you're pulling from that wetland, which will freeze up, so I think it really depends on the climatic conditions, and we'll just have to address that as we get closer to that time, if we're still in that condition.
Well, is there anything in your studies forecasting, bar engineering studies, any of that, that says to you that this is going to be a short-term event, i.e. 6 months. So it would be better for us to look at this, in my opinion, as this is maybe the new normal for the next couple, 3 or 4 years.
I think I can speak for our board, and what we talked about last night is that that is something that we're concerned about, that this is the new normal.
Okay.
And what that means for long-term, and that's why we're not done after this. This is an emergency, would be an emergency step, and we'd be looking first at how to cut off that flow if we can from West Vadnais.
Right.
That's a concern for all of us. And then even more long-term plans for providing more storage in our system.
Well, I would hope that you'd be able to cut that off, because otherwise, as I said at the meeting last night, we're going to pump in perpetuity. We're never going to stop pumping for the rest of the future. And as John stated last night, there is an economic cost to this. And more so is the concern of the homeowners. We can't let them lose their property. So my question to you is, we're talking about funding. What about your group? Can you participate in the funding of this?
So the way we would look at that is, we provide services and technical support, but we also, so that cutting off from West Vadnais, that would be led by us because it's part of a large system, it's a multi-jurisdiction system. We would look at that as our responsibility in this. So that is something that we would provide funding for and do the project for.
How long do you think it would be before, ballpark figure, no, nothing firm, before your group
Yeah.
would make that decision?
Well, our board requested that we come back next month with options. And so that would be, we're gonna be using this next month to find the best opportunity to be able to do that. And then present it at our next board meeting unless we have something sooner. As you heard too, our board had indicated that they were ready to hold an emergency meeting like this if there was action that needed to be taken faster or could be taken faster. So I would guess over the next month, if not less, we'll have an option, and then we can move forward with that pretty quickly after that.
So I guess, as I look at this, we're in June.
Yep.
By the time you guys have the next meeting and make it a decision and, check for money and then say, okay, we're going to do this, are we into next year?
No, I think if we can find a feasible option to do that, we could do that by this fall. I mean, I think we can move quick enough to implement something, depending on, I'm not gonna make any promises, but depending on what that solution might be and how big of a project that might be, we have emergency funding like you do available to do projects like that, and we have good relationships with contractors that we can have on call really to start working on those projects.
Okay.
Other questions?
Thank you.
So I don't know if it's quite motion time, but I think I speak for myself. I know I'm in favor of this, at least to protect that low home as our goal here to begin. But there's still a lot of work to do down the line in terms of what we need to do and how we fund it, what Ramsey County does or what the Watershed does. Again, what the whole system can handle. And so what scares me is that this has been ongoing for a while. I mean, Snail Lake, Grassy, all those lakes are up and the water all flows this way. So ongoing, put your finger in the dike and does it pop up somewhere else? So,
Well, for me, I'm in favor of the pumping to take care of the homeowners. I can't see letting that go. But I think the homeowners have to understand that, to begin with, I don't think we can afford, or will the system hold, or can we pump it down to where it was before, or even close to that. In my eyes, this is an emergency situation to pump it down to make sure that the homes are okay. What that is, what foot that is, level, I don't know. And we would probably need some backup engineering to help us with that and opinions on structures and how they can be affected by water. But I don't want the homeowners to be disappointed in thinking that it's going to go, we're going to pump it all the way down to where it was 10 years ago to begin with. That isn't in the picture right now for me. This is more of an emergency to protect the houses and the structures. And whatever we have to pump it to get there, that's what we'll do.
Chris?
And we have to make sure that, you know, the watershed is in concurrence with this, that we have to listen to what they have to say because they have the technical expertise. We might not like what they're telling us, but they're doing what's best. So just so you have that understanding of where I'm coming from for this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excellent point, Councilmember McGraw. As far as, just to put some context to those amounts of kind of what we are at least initially talking about, and staff has had obviously ongoing conversations with both Watershed and engineering for many months on this. So at that current water level of 896.1, you know, just to provide that ultimate protection for private property.
876?
Yes, sorry. Yep. We would,
He was up, you're at 896.
I'm sorry.
Whoa.
So you know, that 1 foot clearance is sort of one of those minimums that we would be looking at probably. So 895 would be a kind of a ballpark.
875.
75, thank you. Yes. So 875 would be kind of a minimum amount that we'd be looking at. We also have, in most cases, we're looking at public infrastructure protection. You know, that's what municipalities are looking at. And as you know from some of the communication, we do have a sanitary sewer line on the south side of Twin Lake here. So those access points would not be all accessible at a 875 level. It's not essential because it is essentially a closed system. You know, we have good protection on those, but they're not something that we want to maintain access to those inverts. And so we may want to consider going further than 875, but at this time it's really not determined. There's also other ways to gain access. We can individually dike those particular inverts and possibly raise those you know, as a wintertime project or something like that. So just to put context again, I think our maybe minimal efforts would be targeting that you know, 875 level, and as we understand how much pumping it takes to get to that level, and as the season progresses, I think we can make further decisions on if we want to go lower than that.
I think that's an important point. This is a start. There'll be ongoing conversations with our city staff and everything, but there'll be ongoing conversation with the watershed and also other cities around us because they're all involved. So this isn't a one-time decision, one and done. This is a start, and we'll see what we need to do in the future.
Exactly.
So, yes.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Is there any way to put a water monitoring mechanism in the Owasso Basin near North Star Estates, much like it exists on Jarvis at this point in time?
Tina?
Tina?
You're talking about a water level? Yeah, we could put a staff gauge in there. The thing about North Star and Owasso Basin is it's flashy, right? So it goes
Right.
up really fast. So it's almost always at its outlet elevation. It stays there, a rain hits, it goes up and it comes down. So it's not like we're watching it creep up the same way.
Right.
But yeah, I think it would be worthwhile to put a.
I guess
a
my
gauge.
thought there would be is if we hit a certain level at some point, that would trigger, you know, a response plan to maybe bring some sandbags down to the corners of North Star where we have the most risk of water intrusion.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And we can work with the county installs those for us, so we'll work with them on that.
Yeah, and as we get into this, and I know since the The Watershed is in agreement to support this. There's going to be additional monitoring, not only in Twin Lake, but in the North Star Estates or the Owasso Basin, in Jarvis, all the way down the chain, to make sure that, again, things are okay downstream as well as,
I think like was mentioned last night, we already have an automatic gauge on Jarvis, or on Spoon, which is the same as Jarvis level-wise. And city staff and Watershed staff already get notifications when that raises up to a level that is of concern. So that will continue, and that alert level will remain the same. So we'll be prepared for that situation too.
Just for the people at home,
Yes.
could you kind of go over the effect this is going to have on Jarvis, or the amount of water that you need to affect Jarvis, so that the homeowners association and those living there aren't looking at, they're going to take on the flood?
Right, so I'm not the engineer, but I'll try and relay what the information was that she provided last night. But so already we have 2 homes that are below the 100-year flood event for Jarvis, and the city has had an emergency response plan in their hands for a number of years for those homes. There's also 2 other homes that are at risk based on high water and wave action. So how that plan works is, as Jarvis Lake fills up at a certain level, we get a phone call, and it says, be prepared, be watching. The next phone call is, it's time to enact that emergency response plan, which includes sandbagging those low homes. And the plans are all in place for that, are in the city's hands. So this additional water, because what was explained last night is the water can go pretty quickly past North Star Estates. It's a 6-ish hour, 6 to 10 hour travel time from Waldo Pond past North Star. So that's the request, that that pump gets shut off if a rain event is coming. But it takes a while, and it's in that system for a while through Jarvis and downstream. And so our modeling though shows that the increased water at, you saw different levels of pumping. The most it had was, I'm gonna say 0.01 feet. So that's the impact we would anticipate on the water level in Jarvis because of the additional pumping, 0.01 feet on Jarvis Lake. So that might mean, a little bit quicker action through emergency response because of that additional water, but it does not add any additional homes into the risk. It doesn't really add as much risk as, the actions. It doesn't increase your actions much more than what you already have in place.
who declares no wake zones to turn a lake that says, hey, it's high, we don't want any?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm on some correspondence from the Jarvis Lake Association, and they had indicated, I don't know, maybe you guys know more how that works, but they had indicated that they wanted to establish a no-wake zone, or there was a small, more increase on Jarvis, and then they would institute that no-wake zone. I think they work with the county on that.
Okay. So that's not something we can do, or?
I don't know if you know.
I believe county or DNR
County.
have
Okay.
the
I think it's the county.
designation.
Other questions? All right. Well, I'll make a motion. I don't have the specific wording that was used at the Watershed last night. That I think the motion states that we are going to initiate pumping along with cooperation from the Watershed and monitoring to bring the lake level down underneath the low home to a safe distance under a safe level underneath that, which will yet to be determined and announced when we decide what that is. Yes?
Would you accept a friendly amendment to define a not-to-exceed cost in order to comply with Mr. Fisher's third request?
Don't have a second.
No, not at this point.
Got it.
Well, I think that would, staff is going to be responsible for that, monitoring the funding. I mean, it makes a difference if we get outside funding. If you say it's X amount of dollars, you get outside funding, that X amount of dollars the city's going to spend changes. So I think that's understood, so that we don't spend more than we can.
We need a second to the motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. All right, any other discussion? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 4-0. If Tom was here, it'd be 5-0. Just to pass that on, so. And we will leave that up to staff to continue. I know things are in motion already, but to continue that. And again, as things go along and we can notify people when this will start.
My concern would be, can you update us, or is there any more that we have to know about the sewer system? You know, is there any more updating that you can, more information that you can bring back? How are we monitoring that with all of that water that's in there now? Those kinds of things, so that we're sure that that's functioning the way it's supposed to.
Well, we're checking upstream and downstream of the line daily, or every other day as we can. And we have Bolton and Mink, we just got them all the information, and so they're doing a detailed study on the system. And we're going to try to get in there when we can to televise it and make sure that it's holding up that way.
Okay.
And the second part of that is the Met Council's lines. Do we talk to them about theirs?
Yep, we've had communications with them. I'm waiting to hear back from them on my latest email to them. But yeah, we've been
Okay.
discussing this with them as well.
Good.
Does anybody have any information about the threat of trees over there? As one of the homeowners brought up last night. What about the threat of the trees? If the water line stays up, will the trees become loose, start to fall? If that's the case, how do we help homeowners, or can we help homeowners with taking down the trees before they cause damage, if they want them taken down, you know, that whole thing? Has anybody been talking about that and looking at what we can do in that respect? Because that's going to be some collateral damage to this. I mean, they already have to be.
I think we've had, some initial conversations. That was actually one of the things that we had, probably a work session discussion, but back in February when some, I guess, proactive work on some of the dead trees was taking place on at least one property. The city's liability in this case would be substantial if we start doing that. Where do we stop doing that? They are on private property currently. The easement itself is private property. However, there would be a greater argument to be concerned about trees along that easement area. We probably do have permission, or do have authority, legal authority, to maintain that easement in its full width. And so that might be a consideration to maintain trees along that easement, just for the potential of impacting the sanitary sewer line. But from a municipal standpoint, to go forward with private assistance in an issue like that, if we were talking about an isolated project, right? An example of that in a previous situation where I worked in another community along a river. There was actually it was a live tree, not fully underwater, but impacted by both development and flooding. A very large cottonwood tree. I believe it was something in the 80-inch range or better. But because there was commercial structures nearby, and it had multiple impacts on multiple different properties, the city did get involved in that process. But the removal of that took a crane, and it was in excess of $25,000 for one tree. So, the impact is pretty significant when you start to decide to make those or take those actions.
And the other one, and I forget who I was talking to about this, but Bill, most of our sewer lines the city's sewer lines anyway, are buried fairly deeply.
I think they're 6 to 8 feet deep.
So again, not being an engineer, if a tree fell, on something that's 6, 8 feet under the ground, is it even gonna
Yeah, the impact on from the tree falling on the ground there would be no impact from that. It would be if there's roots or if it's by a manhole and it shifts that manhole, that would be the issues you could run into.
All right.
Done.
Anything else? If not, meeting adjourned.